Ancient Israel was part of what we call the ancient Near East, which would include things like Babylon, Assyria, Egypt. And in the ancient Near East, if you were to ask anyone at that time, why were we created? They would all have an answer. And it was a pretty simple one, actually. We as humans were created to do the work of the gods. Everyone knew this. They knew that there was originally some creator God, and the stories would differ a little bit from culture to culture. But the basic story was there was a big creator God who went and created other gods because they were tired of doing the work. And so these lower ranked gods would be the ones who would have to take care of the cosmos. They would have to do the planting and the sowing and the harvesting and all this kind of stuff. They'd have to build the houses, dig the canals, do all the work. And eventually these lower ranked gods just got sick of having to do all the work. And so they decided, hey, we need to come up with a plan where we can just get rid of all this work so that we can chill out, take it easy, relax, live the good life. And so they call in the birth goddess and they take some mud and they find a dispensable god and they kill him and they mix the clay with the blood of the god they just killed, involve the mother birth goddess, and boom, humans. And as weird as the story sounds, and we don't actually know if everyone believed all the details of that story, but they were consistent in their belief that the entire purpose of humanity was to do the work of the gods so the gods could chill out and take it easy. And this is why you would have things like sacrificial systems in the ancient world. Because what you're doing in the sacrificial system is you are providing food for the deity. Or this is why you would have temples in the ancient world. In all the languages of the ancient Near East, there's typically not a separate word for temple. We call it a temple because it's the house of a god. And in those languages, they use the same word for house, like a person's house, and house, like a deity's house. And the point is, our job as people is to raise the crops and manage the flocks so that we can feed the gods, build their houses that we call temples, and basically just do all the work so they can chill out and take it easy. Now, part of the dynamic of this relationship with the gods is the idea that if I, as human, feed you, clothe you, build your house, then you're kind of dependent on me. And it sort of developed this idea of I scratch your back, you scratch mine. If I perform all of the right rituals, then you need to bless me with food or good crops or herds or whatever. And this was especially important for kings. Kings were ridiculously concerned about performing all of the right rituals and doing all of the right things so that the deities would be favorable towards the king, his dominion, his rule, and their society. And it just developed this complete I scratch your back, you scratch my back relationship with the gods. And this in Scripture is called idolatry. And to us, it seems absolutely crazy, the idea that you could carve an image or make a statue with your own hands and somehow think that that was a god. But here's the thing. They didn't just carve the thing and go, hey, there's a god. They realized that the deity was spiritual or had a spiritual aspect. Now, if it's the sun god, yeah, the sun is a manifestation of the deity, but so was the statue. They realized that each of the gods had an essence, or kind of like, but not the same as what we think of when we think of a spirit or the Spirit of God. And what they would do is perform very elaborate rituals where they would essentially ritually cleanse the statue so that the deity could come and live in the statue. And it was called the opening of the mouth ritual. And as crazy as it sounds to us that they would think a statue was actually a god, it's honestly not a whole lot different than the Christians' belief that the Spirit of God lives in our hearts. Now, why am I talking about all of this when we're going through the book of Exodus? Well, today we've hit Exodus chapter 32, which is one of the most shocking, crazy stories in the flow of the narrative of the book of Exodus. Moses is up on the mountain, and Aaron and the people are starting to get a little antsy. Hey, this guy Moses, where did he go? He's been gone a long time. Maybe the God just crushed him. Maybe he died. Maybe he got eaten by a mountain lion. We don't know, but we're on our own. And so they need to concoct a plan so that they feel taken care of. And what they do is they gather all of their gold, they melt it down, and they make a golden calf. And they set this calf up, and they look at it and say, right here, O Israel, is your God, or some translations, here are your gods, who brought you out of Egypt. And we read that and we go, what kind of ridiculous moron would think that you build something out of gold and go, hey, here's your God? Well, there's a couple of issues. One is everything I just described would lend itself to the belief that they realized they made this thing out of gold, but that the deity who brought them out of Egypt is inhabiting it or dwelling in it, kind of what we were talking about with the statues. That's one possibility. Another possibility is if you look at these photos that are running across the screen for you, notice that in each one of these, there's a deity who is standing on an animal of some sort. And these gods would have different animals that they would stand on. But the point is, in the ancient Near East, the royal ride, if you will, the God's chosen set of wheels for getting around, were these animals. And there are many who think that what you've got with the golden calf in Exodus is not an image of God himself, but rather what they've made is the mount of the deity, the deity's ride for getting around. And so when they say, "Hear, O Israel, is your God who brought you out of Egypt," they're not necessarily pointing right at the calf. Rather, they've not represented the Lord who is standing on this calf. Now, we don't know for sure which way, and honestly, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because either way, what Israel is doing at this point is deviant from how God has prescribed their worship of him. And what I find particularly intriguing is Aaron's comment when he's confronted by Moses. Moses comes down, he sees what's going on, and he's like, "Come on, man, what is the deal? What are you doing?" And Aaron looks at him and says, "Hey, we threw a bunch of gold in the fire and out popped this golden calf." And you read it and you're kind of like, oh my goodness, this guy is just ridiculous. He's making excuses. Who in his right mind would believe that? But think about it for a moment. Have you ever had a moment where you weren't sure what to do, you were a little uncertain, and you just kind of thought, well, I just prayed and went with it. And then maybe later you realize, I probably didn't make that great of a decision. And this is probably what Aaron is saying he did. He freaked out. He didn't know where Moses was. They had felt abandoned by God, and they just had to do something. And you can imagine that he was probably praying through the process, and what he's saying is, man, we tried to do what we should, and out popped this golden calf, and here we are, and it didn't work well. Here's the point, I think, for us of this story. There are going to be times in our lives when it just seems like God is not around. And the question is, will we continue to rely on the Lord as best we know how, or will we begin to try and manipulate circumstances or manipulate situations to be in our favor in such a way that we're revealing we're not really relying on the Lord? You see, what Aaron and the people did is they freaked out, they felt like God wasn't around, and they manipulated the situation so that they could feel like they had a semblance of control, or so they could feel like a God was with them. And it did not work out well for them, obviously. For us, there are times when it seems like God's not around and we start manipulating things, or we start setting up, quote unquote, other gods to feel like we're comfortable or taken care of, whether that's financial circumstances or, who knows what, just arranging our schedule, manipulating things. It doesn't really matter. The point is, are we willing to rely on God even when it seems like God's not around? C.S. Lewis had this brilliant comment when he was writing the Screw Tape Letters, and it's a story of an interaction between a senior demon and a junior demon, and the senior demon says, "Our cause is in its greatest danger when the Christian looks around, sees no reason to follow God, but chooses to do so anyway." And I think that's the call of Exodus chapter 32.